What an interesting season so far. The robot revolution was fine, Lux was a banger, The Well was a banger, but will this week's episode break the streak of good Doctor Who episodes, or is it my lucky day? The official synopsis for Lucky Day goes like this. Ruby Sunday faces life back on Earth without the Doctor. But when a dangerous new threat emerges, can Ruby and Unit save her new boyfriend, Conrad, from the terrifying Shriek? Okay, well, I've got some good and I've got some bad to say about Lucky Day. Let's start with the good. So to start with, right off the bat, we get to see the Doctor and Belinda, which is huge because I wasn't quite sure if we were going to see them this episode, because this episode is very Ruby heavy. But we got to see them right at the start. We're still trying to get Belinda home. We're using the Vindicator machine, and I very much enjoyed that. And there is a world where the Doctor and Belinda just don't appear in this episode at all, but I'm glad that they do because it makes this whole season feel so connected. I very much enjoyed how each episode kind of links into the next one. But the Doctor and Belinda land in 2007, which is 17 years ago, by the way. That's a long time. I really like the idea of the Doctor and Belinda meeting Conrad when he's young in 2007 and him seeing the TARDIS disappear, and it's this very mysterious thing, and he gets a little bit obsessed with the police box and the Doctor and aliens and gets curious, and it becomes this obsession for him growing up. Now that I'm saying this out loud, doesn't it sound awfully similar to Love and Monsters? Like a kid has an interaction with the Doctor when he's younger, and he becomes obsessed with it as he grows up, and then he forms a group, and then he befriends one of the Doctor's friends. I don't know. There's some similarities there. This is Love and Monsters 2. Last week we had Midnight 2, this week's Love and Monsters 2. Conrad, who is a very interesting character, he becomes obsessed with aliens and starts his own podcast kind of talking about aliens, talking about Unit, and then eventually somehow gets Ruby on the podcast after some light stalking, which should have been the first red flag about this character. Do not trust this man. And Ruby goes on this podcast and gets involved in this guy's life because it seems that she's kind of like slightly traumatized from her time with the Doctor. And Ruby goes on Conrad's podcast and talks about the Doctor and her life with that, and it feels like almost therapeutic for her because she felt like, I think there was a quote in the episode where Ruby was like, I've got all this stuff in my head and I felt like I was going to explode. I've said it before that Ruby Sunday is not necessarily my favorite companion ever. The main drive for her in season 1 was, who is her mom? It was that whole mystery, and I felt that kind of overshadowed her character. I didn't really know what made her tick apart from, this longing to find her mom. But now that Ruby's found her mom, I was like, what else can we do with Ruby Sunday? So I really appreciate the direction they kind of took this in, and they made me care about Ruby Sunday. We don't often get a glimpse into the companion's life after they've traveled with the Doctor, and I enjoyed this angle where she's like, you know what, I've seen a lot and I question everything. If there's a light flickering, I go, is this an alien invasion or have I not paid my electricity bill? So I truly enjoyed that characterization of Ruby, and this is the most I've ever liked Ruby, and it's not even her season of Doctor Who. She's got PTSD, she's got a lot to process, and Conrad saw that and definitely took advantage of that. He was the shoulder to cry on. He was the person to confide in. Do not trust this man. So I really enjoyed what they did with Ruby this episode, which I was not expecting at all. And speaking of things I loved, that shot at the restaurant where Conrad and Ruby are on a date and Ruby's kind of describing what the Shriek do, that beautiful one take. Frame it, put it in a museum, I don't care. That was gorgeous. I was not expecting. It kind of stands out from the rest of the episode. The rest of the episode is directed just fine, but this one, oh man, they had the sauce. They had the sauce. So Ruby and Conrad fall for each other because Conrad has turned on his charm for his own personal gain, and Ruby desperately needs someone to process her trips with the Doctor with. Like, seriously, Ruby, you should have just got like a therapist or something. This is a bad dude. Do not trust this man. But this next sequence where Ruby and Conrad fall for each other, it's all lovey-dovey. I was going to put in the bad section of this video when I was watching the episode for the first time because it felt a little bit cringy, it felt a little bit on the nose, it felt a little bit forced. We only get introduced to Conrad at the start of the episode, and then 20 minutes in, all of a sudden Ruby has this boyfriend. The dialogue felt a bit on the nose, but then there was the big twist. Because there's always a twist at the end or the middle of the episode. And this twist was the first twist that didn't get spoiled for me this season. Last week, the midnight twist got spoiled for me. This week, I had no idea what was happening when we were going into it. But Conrad is part part of a hashtag exposed unit group called Think Tank. He's the leader on it, and he is hell-bent on exposing UNIT for all the lies and misinformation they're spreading and how they're using taxpayer dollars to put everyone in this state of paranoia saying aliens are real. And his entire relationship with Ruby was fake, so as soon as that happened, I immediately forgave all of the cheesy and on-the-nose dialogue and how it felt forced, because it was forced, it wasn't real. And that's really messed up because Ruby trusted him and confided in him and told him things that no one else knows, and now it's just going to play into her PTSD. I'd be surprised if Ruby Sunday will ever trust anyone ever again. And just a side note, I love the reference of the Cybermen and the Sycorax and the Yeti in the underground. And this episode kind of contextualizes that the Doctor Who universe, like, you know, the people walking around are aware ever so slightly that aliens are real. Because it's not been very clear in RTD2 how much the general public knows about aliens. Like, do they know about a spaceship that crashed into Big Ben or the Sycorax or whatever? So it seems like the general public do know about aliens, which makes me slightly forgive the robot revolution more, because I don't know if you remember, but back in my review, one of my main criticisms was just how chillax Belinda is when robots come crashing into her room. Like, she doesn't run away, she has some like whippy dialogue with them. But I can slightly forgive that because I'm working on the assumption that she kind of knew that aliens already existed. Well, my battery died at a really inconvenient time, but hey, I'm gonna go and charge it. And while I do that, maybe you could consider subscribing to the channel, please. We make videos on Doctor Who all the time. It would mean the world to me. You don't have to, but it would be a nice thing to do. Thanks. I also really liked the fake Shriek costumes, because when I was watching the scene, I didn't think they looked, 100% convincing. You're like, when you're watching it, part of you's like, oh yeah, that's definitely just like a stunt actor doing this, but it's Doctor Who. You can kind of forgive it a bit, suspend your disbelief. But then when they were revealed to be with Conrad and the costumes just look like Halloween costumes, good Halloween costumes, but just, a rubber mask, I immediately forgave how kind of shoddy they look, because they're meant to look shoddy. They're not meant to look great. But they were still convincing by Doctor Who standards, which is a tough thing to pull off. So well done to the costume department on this episode. Really well done. What else did I like? I mean, there's some stuff that I didn't like, and we'll get into that in a second, but there was a lot to like about this episode. Like UNIT. I really enjoyed UNIT's inclusion in this story. I feel like Kate Stewart, in RTD2 especially, hasn't really had that much to do. She's just kind of been there. But this is by far Kate's best episode in RTD2, if not her best episode ever, ? Skipping all the way to the end when Conrad infiltrates UNIT and he mentions Kate's father to Kate. You can see her get angry, being like, hey, be careful what you say about my father. And Kate goes a bit rogue and gives Conrad a taste of his own medicine and releases the Shriek on him. Absolutely unhinged move, but I enjoy seeing what Kate would get up to if pushed and the Doctor's not there. That was pretty good characterization for me. And this episode definitely made me more excited for the spin-off show that's coming, The War Between the Land and the Sea, where we'll see the return of Kate, where we'll see the return of Shirley and the hot soldier guy. Because that show will be written by Russell T Davies and co-written by Pete McTee. And I think this is Pete's best episode, by the way. He wrote Kablam, which I really enjoyed, and Praxis, which I didn't enjoy as much. But Lucky Day definitely stands out for Pete. And before I get onto the bad, one thing I really enjoyed was at the end when Conrad and the Doctor have their little face-off in the TARDIS. Ncuti's delivery in that scene is perfect. He's mad, but he's reserved. I absolutely love it when the Doctor is annoyed without kind of going berserk, and Ncuti is absolutely capable of towing that line really well. I kind of wish we saw more of that from Ncuti's Doctor. Now, I know that was a lot of compliments, but the episode was not perfect. Let's talk about the bad. From some of the marketing this episode, I kind of thought that Ruby and Belinda were going to interact, and I'm just an absolute sucker for when the new companion meets the old companion. That's always a fun scene, and I feel like these two characters, I'd love to know if they get along or not. But the entire season arc for this season is that Belinda is trying to get home to 2025, and the TARDIS can't land in 2025, which is fantastic as a story arc, but definitely hinders you if you were going to set episode 4 in modern day 2025, meaning that the Doctor and current companion Belinda Belinda can't be a part of this story. Thus meaning we basically get one less episode with Belinda, and we only have 8 episodes this season. So this episode kind of feels like it would have been better placed at the end of season 1, like the Doctor had to go somewhere. But I suppose there were already too many Doctor-lite episodes in season 1. Maybe this episode could have been something with Belinda. I don't know. I guess it's a double-edged sword for me because I'm so happy with this episode. I'm really happy with what they did with Ruby's character, but it does feel like the season arc kind of came to a grinding halt for a second to tell this other story. I was impressed with how they were able to kind of tie the Doctor and Belinda into it at the start, but we don't progress the season. The Shriek looked great, was a little bit spooky, not as spooky as last week, but it was very underutilized on purpose. Like the monster the entire episode basically is just in a cage. It's fine, it's locked away. The real monster was Conrad. Do not trust that guy. In the third act of the episode, I felt like could have worked a little bit better. I just think Conrad's motivation could have been more clearly explained. From what I understand, from what I took from the episode as a kid, he was kind of genuinely interested in alien life, and then he had a job interview at Unit 8 years ago, and that went badly, and Kate was like, hey, don't trust him. And that's kind of all we're given. I think I would have liked to have seen more of the unraveling of Conrad's mind as to why he's so hell-bent on exposing Unit. Like how in The Incredibles, you know, Syndrome is such a fan of Mr. Incredible, and then eventually he meets Mr. Incredible, and it's nothing like what he expects, and then he is hell-bent on killing all superheroes. I think I just would have liked to have understood Conrad's mind a bit more, because we spend the first half of the episode where we're basically being lied to by Conrad, and then the latter half of the episode we're like, oh, he's full evil. I just want to know why he's gone full evil. What was it in the interview that made Kate not trust him? And it's one thing to not get a job, but it's another thing to go after the company you didn't get a job from. I just think that idea could have been explored a little bit better. And then we get Mrs. Flood at the end, of course, and I'm like, sure, whatever. As I've said before, that season arc I'm really not interested in. I just want to get Belinda home. But she does say that she's the governor, which is I don't think she's said that before, and it makes me believe that she might be the boss that Beep the Meep mentioned all the way back in 2023. So her inclusion in this episode is fine. It's expected. But if the Mrs. Flood thing doesn't pay off in the finale, I feel like it's just going to tamper future rewatches of these stories. But with all that being said, Lucky Day isn't perfect, but it's bold and weird and gave Ruby the spotlight that she so desperately needed in season 1. I really enjoyed seeing a darker side of Unit and Kate's character, and this is probably one of the better Doctor-lite episodes I've ever seen. And Lucky Day is a welcome entry to a pretty stellar season so far, so I will give this episode a 7 out of 10. But please let me know what you thought of Lucky Day in the comments. I haven't read anything online. We would be saying this is the best thing since Heaven Sent. But yeah, please let me know your thoughts in the comments and what you would give it out of 10. And also, this episode gave podcasts a pretty bad name, but I actually have a podcast called Who's There, a Doctor Who podcast, and we're going to be talking all things Lucky Day this week with special guest DW 2012. We're very excited about it, so please go and subscribe over there if you want to. You know how Russell loves an anagram, and we had a villain called Shriek this week? If you remove one of the E's, he becomes...